pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Alderman Shaw.
Here.
Alderman Ellis.
Here.
Alderman Schmidt.
Here.
Alderman Zwart.
Here.
Alderman Stray.
Here.
Alderman Kavieski.
Here.
Alderman Miller. Alderman Rozak.
Okay, that first item is approval of minutes from the November 7th, 2017 meeting. Can I get
moved.
approval to approve the minutes? You gotta wait till I'm done, Tom.
Okay, I thought you were done. I thought that was the wind blowing so much in here.
So a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any other questions? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes passed. Next item is comments and suggestions from citizens. If anybody has any comments on any subject, please fill out one of the blue cards. I'll call your name when I'm ready. And we'll call you up. Diane Weber, come on up.
Thank you. I've only been here a couple of times. I almost apologize for that, and you guys seem to be having way too much fun. I have a whole bunch of little things, so I'm just going to bring them up, and I don't know if there's a discussion about this or not. Some of them are important to me. Some of them I just think they're an observation. I'm going to go in the reverse of how I wrote them down. Ever since we changed garbage can companies and we go with whoever it is now, we need an ordinance in the city that people have to put them away within 24 hours of getting out there, because this city looks like crap compared to the way it used to. There are garbage cans all over. People leave them out constantly. They can sit out for 3 days. They can sit out for a week. It has nothing to do with the windstorm that we have going on now. It's a minor thing, perhaps, but I think the city of Oconomowoc used to look a lot nicer in neighborhoods than it looks now because there are so many garbage cans always left out. Dog parks. I have a dog that happens to be a therapy dog. I would never go to a dog park. One, because I'm afraid of other people's dogs, even though I have a therapy dog that we go to children's hospitals and the VA. However, every place I go, there are signs out that say, no dogs allowed. I honestly don't know if there's a place I could go to let my dog run. But what I know is, even when you were building the new boardwalk, there were signs on the boardwalk that said, no dogs allowed. People walk around Fowler Lake all the time. How are you supposed to continue the walk if you can't even walk around the boardwalk? It's perhaps they've taken it down, but that sign was up all summer that said no dogs allowed. You can't walk around, the park, in around the driveway around Fowler. Trust me, unfortunately, there are a few people that ruin it for everybody. You cannot walk around Fowler Park without being dog crap in the sidewalks all over the place. I understand that. But not allowing people into a park with their dog on a leash, perhaps it should be worded differently. I'm not sure how. Maybe it should be, no dogs allowed in park unless on leash. The eyes are watching you. Please clean up after your dog. All I know is I think it comes as somebody who, really loves my dog, and I do volunteering constantly with my dog. And again, I would not personally go to a dog park. I find it a really unfriendly city for people with their dogs. I had a police officer one time tell me someplace where we couldn't run our 8-pound dog. Okay, I didn't know that was the case when we moved in. And he was so cute. He says to me, but if you go on the other side of the fence, that's not considered a park. And that's what we do. It's 25 feet away from where the fence is. If I do it once a year, it's a lot. I just think I walk around Fowler Lake almost every single day. I probably put 4 miles a day on my 8-pound dog. And we have signs everywhere that say no dogs allowed. I just think it would be something worth considering again. Flashing lights. We have the crosswalks that are in town. We did the city looks gorgeous. I have to commend all of you. The city looks terrific. I've been here 15 years, and I've been coming here for 30 years, and I think that the city has never presented itself better. I think we need some flashing lights. I think it's in front of the garden center or right by the Chase Bank. We have a crosswalk there, and we have one a little further down. When you're driving through, I have never, knock on wood, where's the wood, gotten a moving violation ticket or even a parking ticket. I can't tell you how many times I can't see the people that are going to get ready to cross there, let alone crossing where they're not in a crosswalk. We need a flashing light that says, it's a crosswalk, something to warn drivers coming from both directions that people might be coming out so that we know to slow down. It's only a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit, but it's very hard to see people there. So it would just be a nice suggestion if there's any money in the budget and if there's even an electrical outlet there, if we could find a way going forward to put some kind of a flashing light by the crosswalks. 517, I don't know what's happened to that. I read the newspaper all the time. I have not seen anything written about that for the last 4 weeks in the paper. So as a citizen who really felt very strongly about not tearing that house down and allowing another condominium, I don't know if it's still in limbo. I don't know that you guys know anymore because the builder hasn't come to you in a while, but I haven't seen anything written, and so it would, maybe even if nothing has changed, if somebody could update the public or the newspaper or whatever, or if you could tell me, am I supposed to be going on a website saying, we don't know what's happening because the builder hasn't come back to us. 60-40 split, again, I'm just reading this as a citizen, and I can tell you that when I read that, I'm hearing 60% of Oconomowoc is going to be made up of single-family private residences, and please correct me if I'm wrong, and 40% could be made up of anything from apartments to duplexes to something that's, fourplex, even if you own it, but it's a multifamily structure as opposed to single-family house. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. So I think that that's a really high percentage of multifamilies coming in. I think going forward 10 years down the line, it definitely affects our school district. I think if you can suddenly have a lot more multifamily, it brings way more people than our schools might handle. Again, I've been here long enough to see 2 referendums passed for, I think the last one was a $69 million. I'm all for schools. I'm a big supporter of public schools. I just think we have to be careful how much of what we're building going forward is going to be multifamily versus single family. I also think it changes the complexion of the community. And, you have to decide, how you want this community to look in 10 years from now. And the last thing that I wanted to bring up was the sex offenders, which is really why I came today, because I understand that there are a lot of municipalities having lawsuits brought against them now. Unfortunately, we have sex offenders. We have all kinds of offenders, and they have to be housed somewhere when they are released. 750 feet versus 1,000, which I think is what we have now, is not that significant difference unless you happen to be somebody that is, whether it's a mom and pop daycare center or it's the library or whatever else. What I'm more concerned about than that even is, and I may not understand this correctly, is that my interpretation of what I read was that as of now, any offenders that we allow to live here have to have been residents of Oconomowoc when they offended, as opposed to the fact that there's under consideration now, and maybe it's because we're being told by the judicial system that we have to do this, but that going forward, we might be opening this up to people who were not residents of Oconomowoc when they offended. So it's a 2-part question going forward. I'm concerned that we're changing it from 750 from 1,000 to 750. I understand if it was 3,000, that's ruling out a lot of people and a lot of residences. 750 is a very narrow window of how close somebody can be living. But I'm equally as concerned about the fact that we would be allowing non-Oconomowoc residents to live here. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else have a comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to the rest of the agenda. Next item I should say is the consent agenda. There's a couple items there. First is the resolution appointing election inspectors for the year 2018 and 2019, and also a resolution for the 2017 utility write-offs. We need a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the roll, please.
Alderman Shaw.
Aye.
Alderman Ellis.
Aye.
Alderman Schmidt.
Aye.
Alderman Swart.
Aye.
Alderman Stray.
Aye.
Alderman Kavieski.
Aye.
Okay, under committee reports, Finance Committee, the first item is consider act on amendment to the Lake Country Municipal Court lease agreement. We need a motion to approve the amendment.
So moved. Second.
Sarah?
Yes, the City of Oconomowoc has a lease agreement with the Lake Country Municipal Court for the space that they occupy within City Hall for their operations. And this past year, the city hired another position for that we needed space for, so we worked with the court to accommodate that position by utilizing a room here off of council chambers and moving their storage. So this lease is just reflecting that updated space, and municipal court approved it earlier in November.
Thank you, Sarah. Any questions? Jeff?
General question. If the courts, if City Hall filled up and we determined that there was no longer room for the court, how much notice do we have to have for that?
Do you remember? Mark remembers.
It's in the lease that there's a certain date, I think it's, like October, September or October, that we would have to notify them of to vacate during the next calendar year.
And I guess where I'm going with that is, obviously, there's a lot of things up in the air right now, whether it's, police department moving or whatever that would reallocate space within City Hall, but we hired 2 positions last year. One was the IT position and one was part-time human resources.
Yes.
And both of those positions really created very, very tight space, and we're losing storage space or making it less convenient. And I think we're getting to the point where even though we're making room for staff, it's not efficient. So as we talk about all of those things and how they play in, I'd like to see us look at space not only for that, but for the areas downstairs. Keep that in mind, and thank you for answering the question on when the lease how much notice we'd have to give, because that gives us kind of a time frame on when we need to discuss that and make some decisions.
No problem.
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, we have a motion and second on the floor to amend the lease. Can I have the roll, please?
Alderman Shaw.
Aye.
Alderman Ellis.
Aye.
Alderman Schmidt.
Aye.
Alderman Zwart.
Aye.
Alderman Stray.
Aye.
Alderman Kavieski.
Aye. Okay, next item is to consider act on an ordinance to repeal and recreate sections 104(1) of the municipal code relating to oaths and bonds of treasurers. This is for its first reading.
I'll move to give the ordinance its first reading.
Second.
Lori, you want to give us an explanation of this?
Sure. Recently passed legislation allows cities and villages to forego the public officials bond that was required before, as long as we have an employee dishonesty policy in our insurance policy, and we do. So instead of having both things now, the law has allowed us to have just one of those. So we need a little housekeeping on our ordinance to repeal the section requiring the public officials bond, and that's what this is.
Thank you, Lori. Any questions? We discussed this in finance a little bit ago and got all the questions out. Seeing no questions, we have a motion and second on the floor. Call the roll, please.
Alderman Shaw.
Aye.
Alderman Ellis.
Aye.
Alderman Schmidt.
Aye.
Alderman Zwart.
Aye.
Alderman Stray.
Aye.
Alderman Kavieski.
Aye. Okay, excuse me. Under protection and welfare, first item is consider act on ordinance repealing and recreating section 9.28 of the municipal code regarding sex offenders. We need a motion for the first reading.
I'll move to give the ordinance its first reading.
Second?
Chief, you going to give us a presentation on this?
Sure.
And if we have questions, Attorney Riffle can.
For your consideration and action today, we had the repealing and recreating portions of the municipal ordinance 9.28, which is the residency restriction for sex offenders. Get this set up right here. The history is Oconomowoc has had a sex offender residency restriction ordinance since September 2011, similar to several communities in Wisconsin. In April 2017, a federal judge found several rules in Pleasant Prairie's ordinances unconstitutional. Their ordinance is similar to ours. As a result, Pleasant Prairie and a number of other communities are being sued. In going through our ordinance with Attorney Larson, we determined that what we needed to do was provide the Common Council with a number of studies or data regarding the safety risks associated with allowing registered sex offenders to live in near various locations, which we provided you with. We also provide the Common Council with data regarding registered sex offenders in the 53066 zip code area. The recommended changes to the sex offender residency restriction ordinance 9.28 are as follows. Reduce the child safe zone from 1,000 feet to 750 feet. The 750-foot child safe zone allows 17% or approximately 1,279 residential housing units available in the city to registered sex offenders. If we were to maintain the 1,000-foot child safe zone, it would allow 9% or approximately 664 residential housing units available in the city to registered sex offenders. And here's just a chart for comparison with the 750 feet versus 1,000 feet. The next recommendation is creating an appeal process. Common Council would act as the residence board. It would allow a registered sex offender to have due process and give the individual an opportunity to show why they are not a risk. The decision by the residence board would be based on the nature of the offense that resulted in a registered sex offender status, the date of the offense, age at the time of the offense, recommendation of probation, recommendation of the police department. Recommendation of any treating practitioner, counseling, treatment, and rehabilitation status of the registered sex offender, duration of time since the registered sex offender's incarceration, the support network of the registered sex offender, the relationship of the registered sex offender and victims, the presence of use of force in the offenses, adherence to the terms of probation and parole, proposals for safety assurances of the registered sex offender, and conditions to be placed on any exception from the requirements of this ordinance. We would have this in discussion in committee at a whole at a future date to lay out the board's requirements. The penalty section is pretty much just cleaning up, and it creates a general penalty provision to include all sections of our ordinance. And it also creates a new section ordinance acknowledging Chapter 980 of Wisconsin state statutes, which preempts our city ordinance and allows for the placement of violent registered sex offenders in the community outside of the 1,500-foot child safe zone. The state identifies a child safe zone as schools, places of worship, child care, youth centers, and public parks. And then if the offense is against an adult or an elder at risk, it would include nursing homes and assisted living facilities. And also, a violent registered sex offender would not be allowed to live in a residence adjacent to one occupied by a juvenile under the age of 13. Questions?
Besides questions, Attorney Riffle, do you have anything to add to this? No. Great. Any questions? Alderman Schmidt?
The 1,500-foot rule, if that were in place, really makes most of the city, I guess, not accessible. Would you agree with that?
Correct. Well, the 1,500-foot rule, we really don't have a choice on. We're just acknowledging that the state statute and it preempts our ordinance, but it does allow for the majority of the community would be a child safe zone, yes.
Yeah.
Chief, the question was raised about residents, if they offended, when their offense was created, if they were residents of the city or if they're not residents. You want to explain that for?
The domicile restriction, way our current ordinance is, you have to live at the time you committed the offense to move back into the city under our current ordinance. Under our new ordinance, the original domicile restriction would also apply that if you lived in the city at the time you committed your offense, you would be allowed to move back into the city, or you'd have the opportunity to go before the appeal board.
So in other words, someone that lived out of town, different city, could not just come here to live.
They'd have to go to the appeal board.
Okay, so there's a process that they could do it, but it's not automatic.
Right.
Okay.
I did a little research, and whereas I'm all for the change, there's a question that's just in my mind here. I was looking at citydata.com, and it talked about ratio number of residents to the number of sex offenders compared to the nearest city. And in Merton, there were 8,371. In Ashippun, there was 2,241. And in Oconomowoc, 191.
Registered sex offenders? We have 9 that live in the city.
Okay, so we've got 9 that live in the city. Now, with that stated, my question here is, with such a small number of individuals, why do we need this law in the books when at the end of the day, the state has certain mandates that supersede anything that we do anyway?
Well, our goal with this ordinance is, first of all, to keep our children safe and then keep our residents safe. The state law only applies to violent sex offenders, and that they fall under crimes that are committed under certain state statutes. The concern is if you don't have an ordinance similar to this, and the communities that surround you, or a number of communities in Waukesha County, Jefferson County do have this ordinance, that this will encourage more registered sex offenders to move into our community, which could put the safety of our children and residents at risk.
Do we know how many cities are being sued at this point that do not have this 9.28?
Well, if they don't have an ordinance, there'd be no reason for them to be sued. It's only communities that have sex offender ordinances that are too restrictive that are currently being sued, of which there are 5 in the state of Wisconsin.
So technically, can I say that we're kind of setting ourselves up for a lawsuit?
No, I don't think so.
In fact, we're trying to do just the opposite. You have an ordinance that's in place right now that is setting you up for a lawsuit because it's identical to several that are the targets of lawsuits, and what we're trying to do is to react to the best we can to guidance, if you will, from the federal court that sort of poked holes in those ordinances, such as not having due process to an individual that wants to move into your community and wants to be able to prove that they're not a risk to society. And that's why you have set yourselves up to be the judge and jury on those issues. Good luck.
So
Go ahead, Alderman Shaw.
so are you suggesting we don't have an appeal process? That the
Oh, no, you have to have an appeal process.
Well, we don't have to have an appeal process.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to set yourselves, you don't have to have the ordinance in the first place. That'll be the absolute safest thing in terms if you're worried about lawsuits.
But then you have no protection of having someone move in.
That's correct.
They can move wherever they want. They can move
That's
right
right.
next to the high school.
That's right.
If you have an ordinance that protects you, and if you have an ordinance that's defensible in court, it protects the city and the taxpayers from lawsuit.
So
That's
the-
what we're looking to do.
That's what they're
So the
attempting.
reason for these changes that we're talking about are to make it more defensible in court.
Yes.
If somebody were to come. And that gets back to, the question I had, why even bother creating this appeal process? And it makes us more defensible.
Yes.
And why go from having 9% of the city available for residency to 17%, is it makes it more defensible. That's correct? That's the reason to do this.
Correct.
Okay.
Alderman Schmidt?
At the committee of the whole meeting and at prior protection and welfare committee meetings, we also had an opportunity to discuss all of the studies and the additional information that you provided that is supporting documentation, I guess, for us as a council when we do act or have to act as, in a due process type hearing. I think, as has been pointed out, I think it's very important that we have an ordinance, because if we don't, then anybody can come in and we can't control it at all. I think many, many things that municipalities do could result in them being sued. I think the best thing that we can do is try to protect ourselves to the best of our ability, and I appreciate the fact that you did all the research on this and are bringing it forward. I know that working with the attorneys and everything, there was a lot of discussion and a lot of work, but from the standpoint of trying to meet the criteria that was set out by the federal courts, even though we all talked about the fact that we'd like to have some longer distances, it really narrows it down. I like the fact that at our previous discussion, we talked about the fact that if the city grows and our boundaries grow and the housing spreads out more, this is not a final document. We can take a look at this as we move forward, and if there's a reason to change those requirements again, we will do that. You know, so it's something that I appreciate the fact that you're monitoring it.
Alderman Stray?
The 9 people we have in the city now, if we put the new ordinance in, saying, it's kind of like, you know, you have to be a Oconomowoc resident. Reminds me of going down and you know, we have a fee for non-residents for everything else, you know, if you're not there. Would they be grandfathered into this, you know, say, these sex offenders that are already here, that never came from Oconomowoc, and how would that prevail in there?
The 9 that are already living here?
Yeah.
The 9 that are already living here are actually grandfathered in under our 2011 ordinance, so they would continue to be grandfathered in.
Okay, and then who's doing all the suing, Stan? I mean,
Lawyers that like to get their fees paid by municipalities. You know, we represented down at Pleasant Prairie, which was that ordinance was worse than ours, that was in place, and we didn't have anything to do with it. We came in after the fact and tried to, you know, put into place new ordinances. But when you get lawyers that are in federal court, they get individuals that have been affected by this, and the bonus to the lawyer is if you win in federal court, you get your actual attorney's fees, and they're charging $500 an hour when it's all said and done. So there's an incentive for them to take these challenges on for the affected sex offenders who have been so egregiously treated by these ordinances.
so then you'll see a lot of attorneys going to Hollywood and Washington, D.C. and things like that, where all the good action is going on.
You said it.
Alderman Kowalski?
Can we effectively deal with this issue in policy without decreasing the radius around the protected areas?
Our recommendation is to keep that percentages higher than 9%. And the 16%, you know, it's a, you know, you're guessing what a federal court would make out of it.
Correct.
You know, I mean, if it was 50%, I doubt that there'd be any question. 9%, you're really getting into a point where it's like zoning. If you zone every use out, you don't like a particular use, you just zone it out. You can't do that.
Sure.
Same kind of deal.
But in effect, there's 9% of the city that they can still live in. If I wanted to live on a lake and I can't afford it, I can't do it. If I wanted to live in Oconomowoc, I have 9% of the available housing to choose from, and we're looking to take it to 17. Maybe the magic number isn't 17, maybe it's 18. We don't know what that magic number is, so if we can adjust our ordinance to put some protections and revise to help mitigate our liability from lawsuit, but not increase the amount of potential residents that they could live in, is that an acceptable risk that the city would take on?
Well, you have to set a radius. I mean, there's no other way around it, and we recommend the 750. We think that based upon, you know, our experience in the federal courts is something that gives you a reasonable prospect of accommodating these individuals.
We have a city attorney to advise us on these things, and their advice is to do this to protect us from lawsuit, and that's why it's presented that way. The attorney has nothing in the, he has nothing to gain, nothing to lose. This is his advice, and that's why he's recommending that we take it. Alderman Schmidt?
When we're talking about 250 feet, we're talking about probably a half a city block based on the size of the lots in the city that are generally going in, even on the new subdivision. It's saying the difference between the 750 and the 1,000 is moving them three houses down the street. And from a safety standpoint, if that's what the issue is, moving 3 houses away or forcing somebody to live 3 houses away more isn't where we want to be. I think the issue is how much of the city is available, and going back to what the recommendations were from the federal court and having an ordinance on that. So I'm not too hung up on the 750 versus the 1,000. I'm more concerned about the available housing in the city and what the restrictions and the protections are, not whether we're going to force somebody to move 3 houses further away.
The nature of the sex offender is predatory in nature. And do you have any information in regards to reoccurring incidents?
I can tell you, as far as the 9 sex offenders that currently live in the city, none have reoccurred as far as sex offenses go. One has reoccurred as far as a criminal offense goes.
So we'd be doubling the exposure to just the amount of, again, the amount of residents that are available, going from 9% to 17%, we're increasing the amount of exposure to our residents for a predatory offense that you just gave the 9 here, but I think the reoccurrence with that is higher than normal.
As far as sex offenses?
Yeah.
There are reoccurrences, correct. I believe it's approximately 15 or 20%, I believe.
I have a question for the attorney. If we were sued, is it covered by insurance, or is it out of the taxpayer's dollar?
You will probably be provided with a defense, but if you do not win, you will pay their attorney's fees out of the taxpayer dollars.
Which could be significant.
Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Okay. Derek?
I've thought about this quite a bit, and I feel like the only reason we're doing this is to avoid being sued. It's not going to make our city safer for the children. And I think there's a balance between, fiscally and making our city safe, and this would make our city, in my opinion, less safe. So I'm inclined to vote no for this because I think it's making it less safe based on the possible risk of being sued. I think we should, if we're going to do something, I don't know that we go all the way to 750, maybe we go 900 or something just to get us above a 10% availability. The other thing I really don't like is putting us putting the alderman in charge of deciding who gets to come here and who doesn't. I'd feel awful if I said somebody could come here and then they ended up committing a crime with one of our citizens. And I don't want any part of that. I don't think I'm qualified to decide if somebody should live here or not. I can't speak for you guys, but I think we should have rules in place and they can live by them. But life is about choices. I mean, they chose to do what they did, and they have to live with the consequences. If a felon, because somebody becomes a felon, they can't have a gun anymore. Is that correct?
Correct.
And they have to live with those consequences.
Correct.
So I think sometimes, this is all about trying to avoid a lawsuit, and I think I'm going to vote no for it the way it stands right now. That's all I'm saying.
In law enforcement, quite typically we deal with changes from the Supreme Court to Circuit Court affecting the way we do business. It's difficult sometimes, but we adapt. and I sort of see this as being the same situation. I don't really see it as trying to avoid being sued. I see it as trying to adapt to a federal law so we can continue to do what we need to do to keep our community safe.
You said it's a federal law. There's no hard line in the sand about the federal law, is there? About how the distance has to be or the percentage? If there was something that said you have to allow federally 12% of your city or 15 or whatever, then we'd have to abide by it. Right now, because Pleasant Prairie lost and they had 3,000 feet, correct?
Mhm.
We're going to go from 1,000 to 750. I realized they had more land area, so it became, what was their percentage that they had available?
They were at 10.
They were at 10?
They're at 10, yeah.
What are they at now?
22,
25.
25.
And like I said, the other part is I don't want to be the deciding factor on whether somebody comes here. I don't think that's saddling us with that is wrong. I think somebody else should decide that because
Who should decide that?
a doctor, a judge, somebody, not somebody who's uneducated in how things work with people who have that type of tendency.
Alderman Shaw?
Yeah, to your first comment that by reducing it by 250 feet, it makes the city less safe. I'm in agreement with Jeff on this one. I don't think that I'm not hung up on the 250 at all. I don't think that's going to make it less safe, more safe, anything one way or the other. And as far as the appeal process, there's a whole network of, or a whole group of things here to base decisions on, and part of that is medical, part of it's police recommendations. I would have the funny feeling we'd be pretty strict on it, to tell you the truth. We'd be very conservative on how we would deal in that appeal process, and that appeal process has got to be run by somebody. I would hate to put it on somebody else. I would take it on ourselves.
To me,
Why do we have to have the appeal process?
Well, that was very, very clear in the federal court decision. It's a matter of due process. It's a matter of constitutional rights. Telling somebody that you can't live here after they've done their time, after
We're
they've
not
served
saying they
their
can't
time.
live here. They can't live in this spot.
No.
Oh,
somebody-
yeah, you're right. They can't live in our town at all because they've done, and it's for non-violent crimes,
Right.
correct?
Right.
To me,
If I got this right, it's nonviolent crimes that were committed and they didn't live in this city in the first place. This is for, the appeal process is for people that are not residents of the city
Right.
to start with.
Right.
and to me, what you said, Derek, we're not the ones that should do it. Well, we're the elected body, and we're the ones that should do it because we're the ones that have to answer to the voters and have to answer to the public. So, I mean, if we had an appointed body, if we appointed somebody, a doctor, or, whatever, they're just appointed. They don't have to answer back to the voters. We have to answer back to the voters for everything we do. Lou?
To the point of that 250 feet, I'm okay with the appeal process. I understand what our obligations are as elected officials and what that brings. But to say that 250 feet is negligible in regards to making the city safe or not, we're increasing the amount of residents that are exposed to the opportunity for somebody with this background to live next to them by 8%, right? We're going from 9 to 8%. So that exposure to me equates to safety. So I don't, at least for me personally, I don't understand the importance of, or I do understand the importance of what that radius means. It is very important. And I would hope that maybe we could amend the percentage of radius, or maybe keep it the same and incorporate the appeals process and other aspects of adjustment to help mitigate our liability and be able to stand in a court of law as a municipality and defend our policy.
Alderman Schmidt?
Going back to the 250 feet, you know, because it is a radius around all those facilities, I mean, every time we put in another park, it creates another 750-foot diameter around that is not open. But you say we're substantially increasing the number of residents that are exposed. I guess I feel exactly the opposite. I think that if we're only saying they have to move 3 or 4 houses down the road, the same number of people are exposed. If that person moves into the neighborhood 3 or 4 houses away, the neighborhood is exposed. It's something that we're all going to deal with if we have somebody who moves legally into a home that could be near any one of us. So, you know, I guess the only thing that the distance did is, I guess, address a couple of the issues that were brought out in the decision from the federal courts.
But the federal courts didn't say you need X percentage of available housing units available for
Correct,
sex
but
offenders, or it didn't say you need a radius of X or greater.
But the 750 versus the 1,000, in my mind, doesn't change the exposure.
They did state, though, that the city that was involved did not have enough percentage of the homes available, correct?
Right.
And that was it. So how do you determine then to get a larger percentage that is more acceptable? We're patterning our ordinance with what Green Bay has done. And Green Bay's ordinance has been defensible in court. So that's the standard that we're using now, is the one that has been proven that it does win. And they're not getting sued. They're not going to, you know, have that issue. And I can't state for facts, but it from what I understand, it hasn't really changed the safety of the community.
What is a percentage
You got a football team out there.
for Green Bay?
What was that?
What is the percentage for Green Bay? If we're modeling against Green Bay, what is the percentage of residents available for?
In Green Bay, almost their entire community is a child safe zone. Very few areas are available. All of their registered sex offenders are told to appeal before the appeals board for determination.
So they don't have 1,000 feet or 750?
They have a map. Green Bay is at 1,500 feet. And the majority of their city is off limits. If you saw their map, it's just one big red area, pretty much.
So they've gotten defended it by being having an appeal process? Is that what you're saying?
It appears that way, yeah.
Why?
Go ahead, finish up.
Go ahead, finish.
Why do we care if somebody lived here before, if they're nonviolent? Why would we even need to? Does it matter that they lived here before? I'm kind of asking the question: why does somebody get a hall pass because they lived here before?
That was upheld in the St. Francis appeal, that particular provision. So it's found its way into, not St. Francis, Franklin, the Franklin appeal of the circuit court lawsuit against Franklin. And so since that was upheld, virtually every municipality has the grandfathering clause in it.
Okay, but my point is if they're a nonviolent sex offender, whether they lived here or not, what difference does it make? To me personally, they're a sex offender. Really don't want them here. I mean, ideally, but we have to allow it. So then we have this appeal process for people who, if they lived here before, they don't have to go through the appeal process. Is that correct?
If they lived here before, as long as they reside in, you know, outside of 750 or 1,000 feet, whatever
Right.
you guys decide, yes.
What I'm saying is,
They have to let him know that they're coming.
understood.
And-
But my point is it shouldn't matter to me if the person has lived here before or not.
Thought behind
I
the
would be
courts-
okay with not having them go through the appeal process and letting them come here and live in the areas that we've designated. That's all I'm saying.
But that's what it is.
But they have to go through appeal process to do it. Why do we have to even make them go through that?
You don't, if they did live here.
If they didn't, though, why would we make them? What's the difference?
Behind that is that they have ties to the community, they have their family here, et cetera. So that's why they have the original domicile provision in place. They're more likely to succeed.
Okay, because they have family here watching over them?
Correct.
All right, just asking.
Good question.
Tom?
Stan, the 3,000 thing in Pleasant Prairie, and then he got sued for it, and what did they put in something in place now that's, did I hear you say 2,200 feet? Or was I dreaming
No,
that?
well, you got to understand it's a totally different community
I
in
know,
terms of
I know
the
exactly, but
size and.
it'll get bigger now with that other company.
I don't know what their number restriction is, but it allows for 25% of available homes to be
Okay.
there, whatever. I don't know if it's 1,000.
1,500 feet now.
1,500.
Yeah, okay, and that's what Green Bay's got, and they've got, right, 1,500 feet, Green Bay?
Correct.
So why don't we go to 1,499 or something like that?
Because that
Because
wouldn't give us any
Yeah,
houses.
It
yeah,
wouldn't.
this is,
And houses
there's
at
no
all?
way to know what a court's going to do, whether you do 750, 1,000, a million, you just don't know. What we have attempted to do is recognize some language from a court that says if you have a reasonable percentage of homes available, that ticks that off as not a concern. If you want to take the risk of, keeping it exactly where it is, I can't tell you that you're going to prevail or not prevail. All I can tell you is you got a better chance the higher the percentage is. We came in consultation with your chief with 750. The other thing is that you will have to articulate the fact that you read the stuff that's there and you say, you know what, 1,000 feet is tied to some type of recidivism as opposed to 750 and articulate that in your own mind that it's a significant difference that is public safety based to go from 1,000 to 750, and therefore we reject the 750 because the studies have convinced us that 250 feet is going to make a difference.
What, I have a question again for you. Okay, say if we did get sued, and we did lose, and it's a monetary amount, what else do we lose?
Well, first of all, your ordinance will be thrown out.
Okay.
And then you got to go through the process of redoing your ordinance, and like we did in Pleasant Prairie, and you'll lose attorney's fees. That's it. And that person can live wherever they want to live.
Okay, so you basically
Or
would-
5 people or 10 people. I think it was 4 I think there were 4 plaintiffs in Pleasant Prairie. One of them died in the middle, got shot, but, so it was down to 3.
Lou?
Again, to me, the comment on the Green Bay carries a lot of weight. They have no available residents within the city, very limited. But through their appeals process, they have been able to defend, correct?
They've let a lot of people in.
70%.
Sure, but it was up to,
70% of everybody applies, they let in.
and that's their individual call.
Yeah, but it might give you an idea of what you're facing if you have nothing for anywhere for people to live.
To your point, from a law standpoint, our best position as a city not to get sued is not to have an ordinance, right?
Well, that'll guarantee you won't get sued.
Right, and I feel like this body won't accept that. So, again, your point of being able to defend the differential between 750 and 1,000 is critical, and having an appeals process is critical.
Absolutely.
I'm totally fine with the appeals process. I am not okay with the 1,000 feet to 750, and I feel that's defensible. And I feel if somebody wants to live in our community, they can find a place within the 9% available, and make a home and make a life. And that's kind of where I'm falling based on the information that's been provided.
Derek?
I agree with Lou. It sounds like the appeals process is more important than the distance or the percentage. So I'd like to make an amendment or propose an amendment to leave it at 1,000 but keep the appeals process in place.
Second.
Is that okay?
We can do that, right?
Sure, because that's what the first reading's about.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor to change the restrictive zone from 750 to 1,000. We can discuss that now. We'll discuss the amendment now. Seeing no discussion,
Hang on, hang on.
Yeah,
Kevin, go ahead.
I think that the appeals process is, once again, we are elected officials, and at the end of the day, for lack of a better term, the buck kind of falls with us, okay? I think the appeals process is one that I think is going to allow us to do the due diligence that we need to make sure that this community is safe. I just don't see where, if we go from 1,000 to 750 or 500 or 900 is really going to make that much of a difference. At the end of the day, if they come in front of us, just like in Green Bay, I'm agreeing with Lou here, okay, that that really is going to keep us from a lot of harm's way.
Okay, I have a question then. Say if it stays at 1,000 and it stays at 9%, and we have an appeals process and someone comes in and applies, do they have to live in the 9% or can they live anywhere?
They would have to live in the 9%.
Okay.
Unless
Just
they
what-
make an exception.
Okay, so they could,
The way your ordinance is set up, though. No, the way your ordinance is set up, as I recall, I haven't looked at it for a couple of weeks, is if you grant them the exception, they have to live within a child safety zone.
which would be the 9%?
9%,
Okay,
yeah.
good. Just wanted to verify that so everybody knows it before they vote. Lou?
So potentially, if we had in the, in our decision-making criteria, if we allowed them to live outside of that 9% through the appeals process for compelling reasons, such as a family located within a restricted area
Or whatever reason.
or whatever reason,
That would be a hell of a lot more, I'm sorry, a lot more defendable.
I would think based on again, some of the information provided and giving them, the offender, an opportunity to succeed and not relapse, being with family and putting that in our ordinance, that would give the governing body an opportunity to adjust outside of that 9% for compelling reason, would further protect the city.
That's another amendment. So let's,
So
But it
after
affects
this
us,
discussion,
though.
I'd like to make that.
well,
The mayor's correct. The First Amendment is go back to 1,000. And then the appropriate procedure would be, if that passes, then have another amendment to say, another amendment to the proposed ordinance allowing a sex offender non-violent sex offender to live anywhere based upon criteria that is determined during the appeal process.
yeah, but that would come up after we get on this. Any other questions? So go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a comment. We have this in front of us because the city attorney tells us this is his recommendation on what we should be doing. I have a really hard time voting against that, you know. He's a lot smarter than I am about these things, and that's where I look at him and say, is this what we should be doing? For us to up to say we're going to change it back from 750 to 1,000, I struggle with that one. But I like it if you are open to a second amendment that does this, then that makes it a little easier to vote for that, yes, to support that.
Derek?
I'd just like to reiterate one more time that you said that Green Bay has almost no areas where they can live, but they have the appeal process, and it stood up in court. So that's why I'm saying leave it at 1,000, and we have the appeal process, and they can go through it, and it sounds like that would probably stand up in court. It's just, it gives us a better chance for it to stand up in court at 750, but we haven't been sued yet either. So
So, one of the things you have to remember, though, and this came to your point, the appeal process will be used much more often. So it would be something that this body would have to make decisions based on the appeals.
that then have a bigger area where people can live.
Just so we're all aware of what would happen.
I know, I'm not
I
really,
know,
but at least
yeah.
I get a kick at the can, I
Yep.
guess.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor for the amendment to change it from 750 back to 1,000. Call the roll, please.
Alderman Shaw.
Aye.
Alderman Ellis.
Aye.
Alderman Schmidt.
Aye.
Alderman Zwart.
Aye.
Alderman Stray.
Aye.
Alderman Kavieski.
Aye.
Okay, now the ordinance has been amended to change it from 750 to 1,000, but still have the appeal process. Are there any other amendments that we would like to discuss at this time? Alderman Kavieski?
I'd like to amend the ordinance to include the ability for the governing body to approve residency outside of the 9% based on compelling criteria to be incorporated into the decision-making process.
So anywhere within the city limits?
So they could if the offender's parents live next to a daycare center, you would be okay with that?
No, but as a governing body that would be looking at the reasons for going outside that 9%, if they're next to a daycare, we have the right to deny that.
Okay.
Or school.
So we have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded to amend it for the appeal process to be broader, I guess.
Guess I would put it, the ability of the governing body to permit under circumstances as determined by the governing body, residency anywhere within the city,
If,
outside of the child safety zone.
can I,
And that could be for anybody
is
then.
it for anybody, or is it for only to live in places where their relatives or reside or something
no.
like that?
No, that's not what you said. That's not what was said.
Well, I said compelling reason, and to me, that compelling reason would be a case-by-case basis, but as an example, would be my family lives 3 houses outside of this 9% area. That kind of gives you the ability to make those judgment calls. I don't know if that would be inclusive of next to a school or a primary safe zone center. And I would think any governing body that sits in these chairs would deny that based on their ability to do that and keep the community safe and defensible to our elected, to our constituents.
Any questions, comments, concerns?
Yeah, I don't particularly like the language that doesn't have any kind of a
There's no teeth.
radius whatsoever. I would want to see it have something, even if it's similar to what's going to be open for violent sex offenders where they have a 1,500-foot radius
Yeah.
by state law, then I would want to see that in place as opposed to just nothing.
So how would that word?
Well, you're already allowing them in within 1,000 feet, so 1,500 wouldn't help you.
No.
But does that 750 then come into play?
Okay, I guess, 750 is out.
Well,
So if you have it at 1,000 and it's 9% of the city, I don't even know if you need this second amendment. Alderman Schmidt?
Well, that's exactly my point. I mean, I hesitated
Now
on the
you're making it
last
more
vote.
lenient than it was.
I hesitated on the last vote for this very reason. I mean, somewhere along the line, there should be in our ordinance a set guideline that says this is what our restrictions are, and it's going to protect the majority of the citizens, and it's an automatic. It shouldn't be something where we're watering it down to the point where anybody is going to appeal, and we are going to make a decision on that, and then if it happens to be in our area, we're going to say, well, we did it in this case for 3 houses away, but now this one's 6 houses away, are we going to do that, or vice versa? I think I looked at this ordinance and said, this ordinance should protect the city, and by the city I'm talking about the residents of the city. It should protect the city government in terms of what happened with the lawsuits, and it should be as manageable as possible. And by as manageable as possible, I'm saying the ordinance covers it, not the first remedy is going to automatically to be an appeal, and we're going to go outside the ordinance, and now we're going to sit there and go back through all the studies and all the other things that we were given as background for this and as reasons to have an ordinance like this, and use that and all of these to either make a yes or a no decision. That to me is crazy. I mean, then why have an ordinance? The ordinance ought to be the controlling figure or the controlling document, and only in the exceptional case should there be an appeal and should we be involved.
I think the way that, from what I read, the biggest concern is changing it from, was changing the ordinance, the original ordinance from 1,000 to 750, which was reversed back to 1,000, which protects the citizens of the city. The appeal process is there for those that need to appeal it to get into that 9%. To make it more lenient just takes away the protections you just gave the people. So I think that part of it really isn't what you want to have, because you don't want to give more than what you need to give. Any other comments, Derek?
Yeah, I don't want to open it up to somebody appealing to live closer than 1,000 feet, because even if their parents live there, tough beans. I mean, it's shouldn't have done it in the first place, is my feeling. And typically, I think by the time they've served whatever time they've had, they should be old enough to live on their own anyway. So,
Okay. Lou?
So the reason I made that recommendation for amendment is to help mitigate city liability. Is there a way to structure that without opening it up to an unmanageable manner?
Well, the deal is you're trusting, you know, a common council 10 years from now having the same attitude as you. And if you open it up to anywhere in the city, it's anywhere in the city for any rational reason, you know.
Can be approved or denied for any
Could be
rational
a former
reason.
mayor or something that everybody likes. Just kidding.
Former, you're still there.
You know, and I just, if Green Bay has an ordinance that basically restricts it everywhere but does allow by appeal, I think that's, and it's defensible. It's not a bad way to look at
Yeah,
it, right?
I'm okay with it being 1,000 feet and not having the appeal.
But as I understand, and I haven't looked at Green Bay's ordinance, I think that they are doing exactly what you're talking about. They're opening it up for anyone to live anywhere that, and this is the way it works. Somebody comes in the community and, you know, whether they live there or they didn't live there, and they find a place they can afford. And they go to the police department. Police department says you can't live there because, you know, Green Bay, there's no place to live. But here's the appeal process. So they go to common council, and they say, well, I want to live here because the rent's $350 a month, and I got a job at, wherever. And I'm cool. I'm completely rehabilitated. It was a 17-year-old, 16-year-old thing, or a 19 and 16-year-old thing. And yeah, I'm like 500 feet from this church, but you know, I'm not going to be offending. And so they just say, okay, there you go. Here, it's a totally different model. You're saying 1,000 feet, and where you do have 9% of homes available, and you would have an appeal process where people came in, and if they want to live in that 9%, and they didn't live here before, they could convince you that they're same deal, 1916. But all we're saying is, be sure that you're comfortable that there's that big a difference between 750 and 1,000 feet. Because if you're going to be seeing more well, I don't know if you're going to be seeing more. I mean, the radius is a radius. So just be sure in your own mind that there's that big a difference in terms of recidivism.
Alderman Shaw?
Yeah, we have an amendment right on the floor right now.
Yeah, we have a motion in a second.
Can you explain to me, if I vote yes for that, what it is I'm voting for, and if I vote no, what it is I'm voting for? Because right now I'm a little confused.
From my understanding, if you vote yes, the appeals process, it will be more in-depth, and the person could appeal to live anywhere in the city. If you vote no, then of course, then that amendment fails.
Okay,
And we go back to the original appeals process, which means that they can appeal to live in the 9%.
okay. Then me personally, I'm not going to be supporting the amendment.
Okay. Jeff?
I think one other thing, again, going back to, my feelings about the distance, I go back to the idea that we can revisit this if we find out that it's
Yep.
not working. I'm with Charlie, I would vote against changing anything with the appeal process at this point, because as was stated at the beginning of the presentation, we will need to go back and actually establish and flesh out all of the criteria that would be used in a hearing like that for us. And that'll come at a future committee of the whole meeting or whatever. But going back to what the mayor said, think about all of the volumes of information and the studies that we had. We have that. Somebody 10 years from now isn't going to have that, but what we're going to have at that point is anything that's current in the way of information based on further lawsuits or anything else that involve other communities. So again, the whole appeal process also could change just based on more information coming out, but to change it when we haven't even set the criteria yet or started to work with it, I think is kind of premature.
And when you state that we have the information, which we do, anything that would happen with a new elected official, they're going to have that information as part of their reference material for being an alderman. I mean, we have to have access to all the ordinances and things like that. That's something that they're going to have access to, because they're going to have to know when they're called upon to do it, what they have to do,
And that it's current.
and that it's current. Any other discussion?
Just to confirm, we vote this amendment down and we stay at 1,000 feet.
Yeah, the 1,000 feet's not part of the amendment. The only thing we're voting on this amendment is to open up the appeals process to make a difference, so. So we have a motion and a second on the floor to expand the appeals process. Call the roll, please.
Alderman Shaw,
Nay.
Alderman Ellis,
Nay.
Alderman Schmidt,
Nay.
Alderman Zwart,
Nay.
Alderman Stray,
Hey,
Alderman Kavieski.
Nay.
Okay, so now we're back to the original ordinance, except it's expanded to 1,000 feet. So that's where we're at now. Any other discussion on the amended ordinance? Seeing none, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Call the roll, please.
Alderman Shaw,
Aye.
Alderman Ellis,
Aye.
Alderman Schmidt,
Aye.
Alderman Zwart,
Aye.
Alderman Stray,
hey,
Alderman Kavieski.
Aye.
Okay, this will come back in 2 weeks for its second reading, and then any other changes that may want to happen
hammer
at
it
that time,
start the
we'll
meeting.
discuss it again at that time. Normally, it's just by title only, so it's usually a quicker process, but if anybody wants to discuss or debate it at that time, it's open for that time too.
Chief, you got this, or you want us to swap out 750 to 1,000?
You can swap it out to 1,000.
Can you send it to us, please?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to old business. First item is consider act on ordinance to amend the municipal code, sections 27.09 paren 1A, table 1 and B, 3C1, 9B and C table, and 10B and C table, and to repeal sections 27.09, 11A, B, and C table, and D, all relating to impact fees. This is for its second reading. We need to give this ordinance its second reading by title only,
Move to give the ordinance its second reading by title only.
Second?
which I just did.
Yep.
That was the reading.
Good job.
Any
Move-
questions or
So
concerns?
then, do you move to adopt the ordinance then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Any questions or concerns? Seeing none, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Call the roll.
Alderman Shaw,
Aye.
Alderman Ellis.
Aye.
Alderman Schmidt,
Aye.
Alderman Zwart.
Aye.
Alderman Stray,
Hey,
Alderman Kavieski.
Aye.
Okay, next item is to consider act on ordinance to amend sections 13.62 paren 3A1 of the municipal code relating to sewer availability charges. Need a motion to give the ordinance its second reading by title only.
So moved.
Second?
Moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, clerk call the roll, please.
Alderman Shaw,
Aye.
Alderman Ellis.
Aye.
Alderman Schmidt,
Aye.
Alderman Zwart.
Aye.
Alderman Stray,
hey,
Alderman Kavieski.
Aye.
Okay, moving on to new business. First item is consider act on an offer to purchase city-owned property located at 1101 Silver Lake Street, the former YMCA site. Bob will give us a presentation on what the whole status of this is and what is being proposed. I think everybody here knows what is being proposed, but I want the public to see what it is.
In March of 2017, we did an RFP for excess city-owned property to be allowed for development. If you recall, the 6.7 acre site, through the process was determined the northern portion of the site did not have soil conditions conducive to development. One of the responders, the city council chose to continue conversations with to allow for potential multifamily development. What we have before us is an offer to purchase in the amount of $450,000 to accommodate a 3-story structure and 60 units of senior living, 24 of those units to be assisted living and 40 as independent senior apartments. As a clarification, because I know if you've read the whole offer, there's references to multiple numbers. It is that total of 60 units. RCAC is assisted living, which is a state license for those 24 units. And then the additional 40 units is 55 plus, which is an age amount, not a number of units. So it's an age capped number of units. So it is 60 units, not, the numbers do add up as it relates to that. So as the mayor indicated, I did want to share additional information about the potential for this site. This is the site plan that the developer provided to us, placing the majority of the structure on the southern portion of the site. Again, 3-story structure where initially the ground floor will be assisted living and additional independent living up above. The additionally provided renderings of what potentially the buildings would look like. So we're essentially looking for you today, based on our conversations and review with this developer, is the authority for the mayor to sign the offer to purchase and to proceed. The developer has asked for a 150-day study period, as well as the city to begin a process of which to rezone the land to accommodate this type of a development. We as staff would move that process forward, but only make that change contingent upon closing on the property with the developer. So that's something we'll send to the Plan Commission when we move that forward.
Currently, this property is tax exempt because it's the former YMCA site. By putting this facility there, it'll establish an $8 to $10 million tax base for that property. So it gets money back on it. It gets a property that's been tax exempt and pretty much underused for the last 15 years back into use for the city. Alderman Shaw?
If in this 150-day study period for site analysis, it was determined that there was more area there available for building than what they originally think, would that change the price at all then?
From my understanding, if there is more available to build in the future, they may possibly build, but it's going to have to be, because we know the whole north half of it is peat moss.
It won't change the price.
It won't change the price. But at this time, there is no perspective to build on the north half of the property.
Okay.
My last-ditch effort, I still think it's a good place for a police station. So I know I lost, now I'm
Any other
done.
comments? Jeff?
Just a comment, I think it's a great use for the site. I had mentioned at previous council meetings that, not just because of personal experience here with a situation, but from what I'm hearing from citizens, we do have a lot of people that are looking for, specifically for elderly housing. So I'm really, really glad that this is a proposal. I hope it goes through. I hope everything's good on it, and I hope we get more of it.
This is kind of a middle of the road. It's not a low end and it's not a high end. It's like the middle category, which I think is really what the city is looking for. Eric?
I would agree with both these guys. It'd probably make a nice police station site, but I think we have a need for middle-income senior housing, and it's a good site for it. I think it's a good use, and I support it.
I think what's going to look nice about it, too, if you look at the renderings, it's going to, remember what the old YMCA looked like, it's not going to look a whole lot different in size than what that was, because that was kind of built into that hill, too. So. Go want to go first?
No, I'll go last.
Fairly?
I will also support this. I'm like the fact that it gets it back on the tax rolls. I like the fact that they'll be using utilities, they'll be using water, electricity. You get those revenues going again too. So I will support this, yes.
Dan?
Just a couple technical things. The time to accept this has expired, line 30. Rather than doing a counter offer, I'm comfortable with this being a professional broker to simply have him X out line 1 and put a new date in for the offering and strike out November 22 and a new date for acceptance, both initial. And then I want to point out to staff that look at addendum A number 1. There's a bunch of documents that have to be submitted within 10 days. Okay? Those are my technical.
Okay. Any other questions? Seeing none, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Can we have the roll, please?
I didn't take a motion or second.
We have a motion?
I don't remember one.
Do now.
Second it too now.
I thought we had a motion and a second. Okay. Now we have a motion and a second. Okay. Motion and a second on the floor. Call the roll.
Alderman Shaw.
Aye.
Alderman Ellis.
Aye.
Alderman Schmidt.
Aye.
Alderman Zwart.
Aye.
Alderman Stray.
Aye.
Alderman Kavieski.
Aye.
I'll check the tape.
I'm sure you're right. Next item, consider act on the 2018 Lake Country Municipal Court budget. We need a motion to approve the budget.
I'll move to approve the 2018 Lake Country Municipal Court budget as presented.
Second?
Is someone presenting it?
I can
Dan? Okay.
briefly. The Court Administrative Committee meets every year to put together the budget for the Lake Country Municipal Court. They have done so, and their next step is to present it to all participating municipalities that are part of the Lake Country Municipal Court and ask for your approval of the budget. The budget is simple. It's the same budget. It's basically the same wording every year, and the amount of the budget is $358,667. That's anticipated revenues and expenditures.
Okay. Do we have any questions? We do have a motion and a second on
Yes,
this
we
one.
do.
Okay. We have a motion and a second on the floor. Call the roll, please.
Alderman Shaw.
Aye.
Alderman Ellis.
Aye.
Alderman Schmidt.
Aye.
Alderman Zwart. Alderman Stray.
Aye.
Alderman Kavieski.
Aye.
Okay, next are mayoral appointments to city boards, commissions. I'd like to appoint Sheila Homburg to the library board. She will be the school district appointee. And we need a motion to confirm her appointment.
Make a motion to confirm her appointment.
I'll
Second.
second.
Sheila is she works at Meadowview School in the library area. Met with her a week ago. She's very knowledgeable, very informed, and very excited to be part of this program. We have a motion and a second on the floor. Call the roll, please.
Alderman Shaw.
Aye.
Alderman Ellis.
Aye.
Alderman Schmidt.
Aye.
Alderman Zwart.
Aye.
Alderman Stray.
Aye.
Alderman Kavieski.
Aye.
Okay, staff reports. Tonight we have an overview of the tax bill. Lori's going to be giving us that overview.
So at the end of the year, after all of our planning, our capital planning, our budget planning, our workshops, it all really culminates into what is the city's tax levy going to be, and what are the tax bills what the tax bills are going to look like for the citizens. Once we get our levy numbers together, we also get the levies from the other taxing jurisdictions, which includes the technical college, the county, the school district. And we put them all together and send out the tax bills. So the tax bills right now, this morning actually, were posted to the county's website. So if you want to look up your tax bill, you can go on the county's website and take a look at it. We are hoping that they will be out in the mail by Friday. I thought this would be a good chance to compare last year's tax bill to this year's tax bill because there's a couple of changes. So when you take a look at it, we expect that we'll get a couple questions from citizens when it comes through. The good news is that the overall tax rate for the city of Oconomowoc went down 21 cents from last year. So that means that everyone will see a little bit of a savings this year. What we have on the board here is we talk all along during our planning, what's our average household? $221,000. So this is a tax bill comparison for a household that the value of their home is $221,000. So if we take a quick look, we look bottom line in the yellow here, you can see that the total amount of tax from 16 to 2017 is really, really close. $3.22 difference, $3.22 less this year. Where do we get a little bit more savings? We get that from the credits that we're getting from the state this year. Our school tax credit has increased from 16 to 17, and the total credits themselves have increased $34.68. So overall, a person with a $221,000 home will see a tax bill savings of $37.90. So that means that our office will likely be issuing more refunds this year. When you look ahead and you're planning your escrow, a lot of times banks will look and say, you know, here's your taxes last year, we'll add $100 to $200 to that. So when you get your escrow check this year, you should be getting some money back. So that's good news for citizens. One of the big changes that is incorporated into the taxes this year is the line here from the state. This year, the state has repealed its forestry tax, which means there is no state taxes on the property tax bill anymore. So the state on this bill, that state tax last year was $38.65. That's not on the bill anymore. So when you take a look at what the school districts increase, the cities increase, and the technical college increase here, taking away the state tax really takes that and obliterates any of those increases and brings that down to that $3.22 difference. So good news for taxpayers this year that the bills really are similar to last year. Another thing I just wanted to point out that is with the holiday this year being on Sunday and Monday, the last day to pay taxes in person at City Hall this year will be Friday, December 29th. Tax bills can be paid online to the county and by check, cash at the counter here at City Hall. Currently, we don't accept credit cards at City Hall, but only online. So what we're going to try to do this year is at the end of those January 31st, those kind of dates where people are coming in at the last minute and they think they can use their credit card, we will allow them to use one of our iPads at the counter to go ahead and make that transaction if they need help with it. That's not something I'm going to advertise in the newsletter that you guys got a copy of too. That goes with tax bills. But it is something that we can help you with if you do need the help with it. Any questions?
There'll be a surcharge on the one even at the counter, correct?
We don't accept credit card payments. The county does. And yes, there's a surcharge on that. Now, next year, once we get our new software in place, likely the city will be accepting credit cards too. Anytime a municipality or government body accepts a credit card, we generally charge that surcharge back to the person paying.
Agree.
Thank you, Lori.
You bet.
Any other staff reports?
Yes, I just wanted to announce that the City of Oconomowoc will be hosting a special one-day collection of household electronics and appliances that's open to any Waukesha County resident. That will be held on Saturday, December 9th from 9 a.m. to noon down at our 630 South Worthington Street facility. And there's more information on our website if you want to know what kinds of things are accepted at the collection.
Thank you. Reports and comments from Alderman?
I would like to say that the Christmas parade was outstanding this year. I was a little depressed that I didn't see a lot of you guys out there, you know, wishing our constituents a Merry Christmas and a joyous time of the year. I'm hoping that next year you do have the ability and the opportunity to do that. I think it was really, really a good time. I didn't have enough candy, but it was a really, really good time.
Any other comments? Lou?
During our last meeting, you mentioned all of the activity that was coming up in the 2 weeks just prior, and I gotta say thank you to everyone again that volunteered from a citizen standpoint and that put all their effort into it. that was part of the city, because I think the events went off about as well as you could anticipate. And the number of people from out of town that had a chance to come in and enjoy our city and those events was amazing to see, especially with the train, the German market, as well as the parade. The effort that goes into that is immense, and I hope that as people have enjoyed it, more people will step up and volunteer to help make those events even bigger and better in the future.
Jeff?
I would echo that and also say to all the city staff, I mean, I know a lot of overtime and a lot of man hours went into doing everything. And Ron, I know your people were real busy all weekend, and Chief, please thank them for us.
Tom?
Yeah, there were probably 25,000 people wandering around in those three events, and I was in the parade. And we may have to look at something on down at the German market, because that was kind of really, you know, I think there's some fire restrictions or something like that. They might have to, somehow we have to figure something out.
Eric?
Couple quick things. I'd like to address some of your comments. The garbage cans, do we have an ordinance that says they're supposed to be put back at any time? I think I was reminded of it once when I first moved here because I put them out on the wrong night. So I think there is something in place. I think there should be a few parks where the dogs are allowed on leashes. And I've gotten comments on the flashing crosswalk lights. I think that's probably tough to implement. A person told me about in Madison how they have containers set up with flags in them, and you can hold them out when you want to cross. It's like a crosswalk flag, and then put it on the other side when you get there. That seems like it would be kind of a nice little cheap thing to do and try and see if it works. It's basically a fluorescent, like a bike flag that you would hold out, stop cars, and you could walk across. Just something to throw out there. And lastly, I'd like to thank everybody, like you guys did, for all the hard work to make our city special. It's a great place to live, and it's because of you guys.
Charlie?
Yeah, I too wanted to thank Diane for her comments. I would agree with you on the crosswalks that they are a little dark. It's a little tough to see if people are going to be stepping out into traffic or not. And it's something we can, we can look at what options we have on that, because we certainly don't want to see somebody get hit there, and what happens is the person
Charlie,
slams on the brake and
we have
it's
to
the second one.
keep the comments.
Okay.
You know, the point is, if we want to put this on agenda and let everybody know we're talking about it and potentially spending money to do this, it would be a good thing to do.
Okay. Any other comments?
Well, I guess that gets to the question is, when people do have comments, they come, they talk at the meetings, how do we get back to them with answers to their questions? And we don't need to answer
You can do it
that now.
individually with that person, and then if you think that it's a good idea to have a general discussion where the public is invited to hear what you have to say, because the public didn't know you're going to be talking about it, get it on the next agenda.
And to do that, just get a hold of me or Sarah, and we'll get it on the agenda. Okay, comments from the mayor. I have a few things, and again, a lot of it relates back to what everybody's been saying. 2 weeks ago was the German Christmas market, which was a huge success, not just for the Christmas market, but for the merchants downtown. The stores were packed, the restaurants, the facilities, everything was crowded all weekend long. I think we were fortunate with the weather. But I was here Friday, and I was here Friday night, and then I also was there on Sunday just to see the events, and everybody was having a good time. And the only complaint that I did hear was it was too crowded. And with success, you're going to get that. And we shouldn't complain about success because it's nice to have it. So that was a fantastic weekend. This last weekend with the first annual tree lighting ceremony went off without a hitch, except for the fact that the city administrator turned the tree off by accident. But other than that, it was fine.
Saving electric.
We took the clicker away from her. I think, and I've been doing the parades for a number of years, and I think this was probably the most highly attended parade that I can remember. And it was, the sidewalks were full, everything was full, and it worked out very well. And then to top everything off on Sunday night, the holiday train. You know, Tom, you said you think there were probably 25,000 people here for those different events. I think you probably double that number. Between the two on the German Christmas market, the parade, and that train, it was a lot of people in town. And what I'd really like to commend the police department on was it was so easy to get in and out. I had no issues leaving any of the times that I was coming in or leaving town. It was fantastic to get in and out. I was handed a note tonight by Christy, who was very integral in the train, and just as a matter of fact, the city collected over 4,000 pounds of food, plus over $5,000 in cash. Just the night of that, the train. One person dropped off a check for $2,400, which I think is fantastic. I don't know who it was, but it was a check for $2,400. So the food pantry should be full for quite some time between the German Christmas market, the parade, and the train. I want to thank those that were really involved, and Bob worked a ton of time on the German Christmas market, Christy on the train, and Paige was a big assistance in the tree lighting ceremony. So I want to thank those three individuals particularly, but other than that, all the departments, the department heads, everybody worked together, and I think we made the city look very, very good. I've heard nothing but good comments. I've seen nothing but good comments. So I want to congratulate everybody on a very, very successful couple of weeks. So we are not going to have a closed session tonight. There's no updates there, so we need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.